Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here this morning. My name is Izzy Fuqua. I'm the Adult Programs Coordinator for the VMFA, and I am joined by my wonderful colleagues, Twyla Kitts and Dr. Colleen Yarger, for this month's gallery talk, 3 and 30 plus short stories, which is on a current exhibition at the museum in the Works on Paper gallery. So with that, Colleen and Twyla, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Izzy. Good morning, everyone. Sorry that we can't be in person, but hopefully we're going to make this an enjoyable experience online. So this particular 3 and 30 plus was inspired by the current exhibition that I worked on, that is in the Works on Paper gallery, and it is up through January 9th, and it is Sir Frank Short, Out of the Shadows, and it spotlights the career, the output, the personality of Sir Frank Short, who has been overlooked in sort of the canon of printmaking history, but he really was arguably the best educator for printmaking that the late 20th or the late 19th, early 20th century produced. And he really set the bar for printmaking going into the 20th century. So on the screen right now is just a gallery shot of one corner of the exhibition. So we invite you, if you're comfortable, to come to the museum and check it out. So the 3 and 30 plus that Twyla and I are going to be sort of bouncing off of each other and talking about today are stories throughout the work of Sir Frank Short. And Sir Frank, like many artists in the late 19th century, early 20th century, he was omnivorous when it came to the things that inspired him and his art. And so we kind of took the literature component and we really started thinking, how many different ways can you experience that in Frank Short's work? And so that's what Twyla and I are going to be hopefully bringing to you today, and you leave with a greater appreciation of. So, but before we do that, you may be wondering, who is Sir Frank Short? Which is a legitimate question. So Frank Short was born in, and this is just a oil painting of him, so looking, very regal and prestigious in his blue workman's smock. He was born in England's Midlands. It was a very heavily industrialized area, not very picturesque in the beautiful sense, and Storybridge is located with the red dot right there. When people thought of Storybridge in the mid-19th century, this is the type of image that would be conjured to mind. This is an illustration from the Illustrated London News. It was one of the most popular English periodicals published throughout the 19th into the 20th century. And because of that readership, a lot of sort of the stereotypes for like England's Midlands became cemented in people's brains from illustrations like this. And as you can see, if you look at the horizon, right where you have that one little strip of light, you see all of the chimney and the smokestacks, that the smoke just sort of blends into this cloud. You're not really sure where atmosphere begins, produced naturally, versus the industry. So this blackness, this smog, that's what earned this area the nickname, the Black Country, where literally the sun would be blotted out because of all the smog being thrust up into the atmosphere. So this is where Frank Short was born and raised. And as you can probably imagine, he was sort of indoctrinated into this lifestyle. He came from a family of engineers and decided to follow in his father and grandfather's footsteps. On the screen right now is actually his civil engineering certificate to become an associate member of the Institution of Civil Engineers. And this document is pretty special because it's never been published in books, but it provides a paragraph of all of his experience. So if you were imagining, well, what was Frank Short's resume? What would it look like? This document actually contains sort of that snapshot where we know he worked on waterworks projects, we know he worked on mills, we know he worked on bricklaying. So he was sort of a jack of all trades when it came to civil engineering, working on many different projects. And after he had sort of outgrown sort of his expectations. He sort of outgrew what he could do in the Midlands. He moved to London and sought employment with one of the most celebrated engineers of the age, Baldwin Latham. And if you're looking on the screen, if you can follow my cursor, Baldwin Latham was actually the sponsor for Frank Short to become an associate member in this august body of engineers. But engineering is what Frank Short did by day. By night, what Frank Short did was he went to all of the museums in London. He had a real fondness for art. It wasn't something that was very heavily championed in the Midlands. You had more industrialized products like pressed glass. You had some ceramics, but nothing on the scale of what you could have in London. And as Frank Short tells us in his later years, looking back on his late 20s, early 30s, he said, I was a good engineer, but the gray days along the Thames kind of got to me. So I would frequent the museums at night. And he says that the transformative moment that tipped him from wanting to live a life in engineering to wanting to become an artist, it happened when he encountered a print by the seminal English landscapist J.M.W. Turner, Joseph Millord William Turner, who had the greatest career of any English landscapist in the early 19th century. And in particular, it was a print in the Liber Studiorum, which here on the screen, I give you the frontispiece. And so now we're going to segue into sort of talking about literature, books, and the stories. So the Liber, if you pull up Google Translate on your computer and you do Latin to English and you type in Liber, that literally translates to book. And studiorum, if you think about it, if you ever took like French, Spanish, you know, studiorum, book of studies is what it literally translates to very smoothly in English. And the funny thing is, Turner called it a book of studies. But if you think about a book, you may think of cover, paper, spines, words. That's not what this was about. This particular book that Turner produced was supposed to be 100 free sheets of prints after different types of landscapes. There wasn't any words, there wasn't any explanation. Really what you got was the title of whatever print it was you were looking at. And you had a couple of letters that denoted if the type of landscape was considered by Turner to be a pastoral landscape, an architectural landscape. Was it a marinescape? Was it a mountainscape? So Turner tried to divide it up like that. Now this publication was supposed to have 100 of these images, these free sheets of prints that were after Turner's famous compositions in oil paint. Turner got bored with the project, abandoned it after 70, so the rest of the 30 laid in varying states of disarray. Now, these prints were avidly collected over the 12-ish years that they were produced. By the time Frank Short, living in the Midlands when he's training to become an engineer, the way that Frank Short would have encountered these prints are in reproductions of prints that were bound and put into books like this. And this is a 3-book set. It divides up the Liber Studiorum into its various sort of categories: pastoral landscape, mountain architectural. So this is how Frank Short would have encountered in his early life these particular works. And so when you open it, here is sort of what you get. It's a little bit more book-like. It tells you what you can expect when you flip through the pages. And at the bottom here, you have a reproduction of a print, and the print is, you know, probably a reproduction of a painting. But this type of reproduction isn't necessarily on the same level of skill that the original print was. So if we put the two side by side, here is, you know, an actual print that was overseen by Turner, produced partially by Turner for his celebrated Liber Studiorum book on the right. And this is the autotype, which is a photomechanical reproductive process of the print on the right. So you can just see when it comes to Turner's, because of this sepia, this sort of brown tone, there's sort of a radiance, there's a lightness. The darks are more richer and more fuller and robust, and the image really gets flattened. The perspective really is lost in the image on the left. Now, moving forward a couple of years, so Frank Short's in London working for Baldwin Latham on engineering projects along the Thames. He's getting a little bored. He sees a print by Turner in a museum and sets his sights on becoming a printmaker. And Frank Short really challenges himself at the outset. He's not going to start small. He wants to start by learning the way that Turner learned to print in the Liber Studiorum. And so Frank Short picked as his first subject Procris and Cephalus. And this was a composition that was part of the Liber that Turner's probably greatest critical advocate of the 19th century, John Ruskin, and that name may be familiar to most of you. He had a prolific writing career. He was also a good artist, but a champion of Turner. Ruskin was really the one that said in his books that if anyone wants to be a student of landscape, you should first and foremost study the Procris and Cephalus produced by Turner, because it's from there you will learn about balance, you will learn about line, you will learn about composition, you will learn about all of the elements and principles of art that you need to be successful, to be a good landscape artist just like Turner. But Ruskin's really looking at this for its formal artistic elements. He kind of doesn't really ever go into great depths explicating why it's called Procris and Cephalus and not like a glen or a glade or something like that. And so to tell us a little bit more about who Procris, who Cephalus was, what it is that we're actually looking at, what the drama is that's going on, not including the landscape. I'm going to kick it over to Twyla Kitts.
Awesome. So there are really several versions of the story of Procris and Cephalus, or often it's Cephalus and Procris in Ovid. But Ovid, in book 7 of the Metamorphoses, that version seems to fit the mood of this print best. And it begins many years after this scene. So if you want to, so we have Cephalus, a young Athenian who has journeyed to Aegina to ask for military support for Athens against the gathering menace of King Minos of Crete. So when asked about the javelin that he's carrying, he tells his host about his happy marriage to the lovely Procris, whom we see here, and the tragic story of the javelin. Next slide. Soon after their marriage, Eos, or Aurora, the goddess of the dawn, kidnapped Cephalus, wanting him for herself. But Cephalus only wanted to return to Procris. It was Procris I loved. Procris was in my heart. Procris was ever on my lips, he cried. Offended, Eos let him go, exclaiming, "Cease your complaints, ungrateful boy. Keep your Procris, but you will come to wish you had never had her." Her words made Cephalus doubt Procris's fidelity. So with the goddess's aid, he took on a different appearance and attempted to seduce his own wife. She resisted for a long time, but eventually hesitated when he offered her a vast fortune. When he revealed his disguise, she fled in shame to serve the virgin goddess Diana. And we actually put this print in to show you that artists for the last couple of hundred years had been drawn to this story. There are many, many versions of this entire story, but this is Eos carrying away Cephalus. Next slide. So Cephalus and Procris are eventually reconciled when Cephalus admits he too would have been tempted by sumptuous gifts. They lived together for quite a number of years happily, but once while Procris was wandering in the mountains, Diana had given her a javelin that could never miss its target, and Procris in turn gave this javelin to her husband. Cephalus often went hunting in the morning with his peerless javelin, and after the hunt, when he was hot and tired, he would lie in a glen and beg the breeze to come and cool him. Someone overheard his words and went to Procris with the false story that Cephalus was in love with some nymph. Jealous, she followed him and hid in a nearby thicket. And I really wanted you to see this wonderful Kiering's painting that is not currently on view, but Colleen says it might come back out in about 2025. But when it is, you must run to see it, because here are Procris and Cephalus down here in the corner, but there are all of these other little stories being told in the background. And the more you peer at it, the more you see all kinds of other narratives that are kind of coming along with this one. So I had to kind of go there. Next slide. Cephalus, thinking that the noise when Procris was hiding in the thicket was an animal, hurled his javelin at the noise, and the magical javelin pierced Procris's breast. With her last words, she begged Cephalus not to marry the nymph. When he explained that he was just calling to Aura, the breeze, not Aurora, the dawn, she was able to die with a smile on her face. And that's the end of the story of Procris and Cephalus. Colleen, did you want to say a word about this wonderful Turner drawing?
Yes, absolutely. So when Turner was preparing the Liber Studiorum, he would usually create a 2-scale watercolor or ink and wash sketch of the composition that he wanted to achieve in the final print. Because with many of his paintings, the paintings are in full color. So you get the gamut of tones, but when you're putting it into print, you're turning something that, has the full color wheel, and you're putting it into monochrome. So sketches like this, what you see on the screen, were invaluable to not only Turner, but to the printmakers who were helping Turner make this vision become reality. Because by doing this, you're seeing, is a composition that's in color going to translate and still be just as interesting in a monochrome when you strip it of all of that extra visual sumptuousness? And I would say, yes, indubitably, it is still a masterful composition. And in the corner here, just like in the Kiering's painting that we brought into this PowerPoint, you have our protagonist in the bottom corner with the dog, and you see Procris laying here with Cephalus over top of her. So in terms of other sort of stories that you see across Frank Short's oeuvre, Twyla can begin to tell you a little bit about Romanticism.
Absolutely. Well, as we were looking at his works, we thought how beautifully many of them fit with a lot of the Romantic novels. And we discovered that indeed, he actually did 2 illustrations for Sir Walter Scott's Red Gauntlet, a romantic tale of a doomed revival of the Jacobite cause. So thank Outlander, if some of you have thought of that. But these are the 2 illustrations that come from that book. And I meant to have read it by then, but somehow Amazon lost my address and it got lost. So it just came 2 days ago. I'll get back to you on what these scenes are about when I'm able to finish Red Gauntlet. Sir Walter Scott was actually the epitome of the Romantic writer. He wrote the Waverley novels. You probably know him from Rob Roy and Ivanhoe, Marmion and Lady of the Lake, so also a poet. So really we're kind of into that idiom. But then as we were thinking that Frank Short actually goes beyond that, because he really has such a range of moods that he can provide. So I think we're ready for another screen.
Yep. So moving still further in that romantic sort of Gothic novel frame, Frank Short was not the only one to seek out locales that really stimulated these ideas, these thoughts, these feelings. And so just to sort of keep the threads that we have going so far on the screen right now is another example of a print that was produced for Turner's Liber Studiorum. This is off the coast of Yorkshire, and it's near a little seaside town called Whitby. And this is Whitby as it is today. We actually have a gallery associate who grew up not more than 20 miles away from this exact location. And when we put, there are a couple images that are coming up, when we put these images up in the gallery, he was like, I've been there, I've walked by that building. So it's a place that people like Frank Short, like Turner went to, and as Twyla, pointed out to me, Wilkie Collins, Charles Dickens, many people went here seeking inspiration. So currently on display in the gallery at VMFA as part of Sir Frank Short Out of the Shadows, we have the next 4 images that are on the next 4 slides. So when Frank Short went to Whitby in 1886, so this is approximately 3 years after he sort of throws up his hands at engineering, as he would say it, to become a printmaker. And this is 1 year after Sir Frank Short produces Procris and Cephalus after Turner's Liber Studiorum. So we're already becoming an original artist. We're learning what we can from the masters like Turner, but we're also doing our own thing, simultaneously. So Frank Short went to Whitby. And like many artists, he brought his sketchbooks, he brought his watercolors, and he produced this sketch. It is not meant to be a final product. That's why we call it a sketch. And this is the little Marine Hotel, which our gallery associate, Ken, was like, I know that hotel, it still stands. And it's true. You can go to Google Maps, go to Street View, and you can literally walk right by it in the Street View. So Frank Short makes this sketch of a fish auction, a normal everyday occurrence in Whitby. And kind of like Turner, he's sitting there thinking, would this make an interesting print? If we strip it of all of its color and reduce it to monochrome, is it going to still work? And this is the type of image that Frank Short would do to sort of test that idea out. And we call this a blot or a blotch sketch. And you can see we're doing sepia exactly like Turner did. And we're really seeing if this is a composition that has balance and has, some sort of visual pleasantness to the eye. And Frank Short said, yes, it does. So I will pursue this. And so here in the same year, in 1886, Frank Short really pursues this watercolor in print form. And so this particular print is huge. It's almost 14 inches high by almost 20 inches wide. So in terms of printmaking, this is on the monumental scale. It is a wall size, impressive image. And the particular type of printmaking technique that Short used to produce this is Mesotint, which is very labor intensive. It involves starting with a smooth copper plate, using a many-toothed rocker to really texture up the whole surface. So it's almost like chenille. It has sort of burr or metal, like sort of surfs and waves all over it. And then you take a scalpel and you shave off some of that texture. So the areas that are most highly textured will retain the most ink and print the darkest on paper. The areas where you reduce or remove all of the texture will print the lighter tones and white. So Frank Short got the image to this particular point, and then he took a trial impression. He wanted to see how he was getting along. And at this point in 1886, he looks at the impression that he gets. He looks at this image and he goes, I'm not satisfied with it. I don't think I started off in a good enough spot preparing the plate. So I'm going to set this aside. Now, if you look at the date on this, once again, it's 1886. So Frank Short, who was born in 1857, he's 29 years old when he's doing this. Now look at the date on the final product here, okay? 1935. So he picks this up almost 50 years later and restarts the plate from scratch and does the same composition again and sees it through to completion. And this is actually one of the last images that Frank Short ever exhibited publicly before he passed away 10 years later in 1945. But it wasn't just this fish auction at Whitby. This was not the only thing that inspired him about this locale. And so what Twyla and I did when we were looking at these romantic and Gothic novels, we started looking for how does Frank Short's imagery parallel what is written in the text. And so Twyla is going to take us through some of it.
We're going to look at a few of his images and then consider some descriptive passages about Whitby that another writer besides Dickens and Wilkie Collins produced, inspired by this popular coastal town. So I want you to think about how well the words match the images as we go through these. And I'm wondering if you're going to be surprised to learn who this author is. And this rope walk at Spittlebridge, we thought was a nice one to begin with. A rope walk is a place where you make ropes. It's long enough to lay them out. So, but I just thought this was a really wonderful way. It almost, that curving line almost takes us into the story. And I think I'm ready for the next slide.
You got it.
So this is Sunrise or Whitby Scour. And the quote is, "It is nice at high water, but when the tide is out, it shoals away to nothing, and there is merely the stream of the Esk running between banks of sand with rocks here and there." And I think, yeah, go ahead. And then this one is the lifting cloud. So we have gray clouds tinged with the sunburst at the far edge hang over the gray sea, into which the sandpoints stretch like gray fingers. The sea is tumbling in over the shallows and the sandy flats with a roar, muffled in the sea mist drifting inland. The horizon is lost in a gray mist. All is vastness. The skies are piled up like giant rocks, and there is a brool over the sea that sounds like some presage of doom. This is Fish Auction at Whitby, that very early sketch. This is a lovely place. The little river, the Esk, runs through a deep valley, which broadens out as it comes near the harbor. The houses of the old town, that's the side away from us, are all red roofed and seem piled up one over the other anyhow, like the pictures we see of Nuremberg.
Yep, so here are the red roofs over here that are alluded to, and this is the little Esk that runs through, literally bisects Whitby in half.
One old fisherman who for more than half a century has kept watch on weather signs from the East Cliff foretold in an emphatic manner the coming of a sudden storm. Before the sun dipped down below the black mass of Kettleness, standing boldly athwart the western sky, its downward way was marked by myriad clouds of every sunset color, flame, purple, pink, green, violet, and all the tints of gold, with here and there masses not large, but of seemingly absolute blackness in all sorts of shapes, as well outlined as colossal silhouettes. The experience was not lost on the painters, and doubtless some of the sketches of the prelude to the great storm will grace the RA and RI walls in May next. Colleen, what does that mean?
Okay, well, I can tell you, I can show you. When you see the letters RA, that refers to membership into the Royal Academy of Arts. If you see RI, that refers to the Royal Institute of Watercolors. So these are specific groups that artists who were elite enough and respected enough by their peers, they could get voted into these. And having those letters after your name, kind of like PhD or MA, these were signs, these were tokens that expressed to people that you were someone in your field who could be respected. And so every year, the Royal Academy of Arts in sort of May would have an annual art show, and the catalogs are all online. And these are very helpful because it literally gives you the title and the artist by room, and actually from left to right as you enter the main door. So if you go through these catalogs, you can almost visualize how the entire show was set up. And so Frank Short, after he went to Whitby, he submitted to the Royal Academy an etching. And if you look at page 51, and if you have the stamina to get through 1,504 works, by the time you get to the 1,505th work, then you will see Gray Morning Whitby by Frank Short. So we hope you had a big breakfast or a good lunch, because you're walking through a lot of rooms to get to the printmaking room, which is sort of towards the back of the Royal Academy. And if you're at all interested in what it was that Frank Short actually hung on the wall, this is the etching with a little bit of dry point, Gray Morning at Whitby. So in thinking about the quotes that Twyla found, once again, we're kind of running par for the course for what Whitby was. But probably many of you are wondering, where did the quotes come from that Twyla just read? So
are you surprised that all of these passages describing Whitby are from Dracula by Bram Stoker? He visited the town of Whitby in 1890, and that visit helped to inspire Dracula. And he actually did much of the research for the background of Dracula at the library in Whitby. And you can see they have a wonderful wall plaque that kind of underscores that here. And I should also mention that the town of Whitby is where Dracula's ship comes ashore. And that's where sort of the whole beginning of the novel takes place, in the environs of Whitby. So it really does set up really beautifully this creepy story. So, but then as we were thinking, we also thought that a number of the kind of the rising realism authors, such as Charles Dickens, and then some of the modernists like Joseph Conrad, these two authors also produced wonderful passages that we thought paired really well, and really pulled out some of the things that Colleen wanted to talk about in these images. So if you want to go on to the next, yes. So our quote from Hard Times by Charles Dickens is, and we're going to split this into two sections because there's so much to unpack here. It was a town of machinery and tall chimneys, out of which interminable serpents of smoke trailed themselves forever and ever and never got uncoiled. It had a black canal in it. And I'll pause to let Colleen talk about a wintry blast on the Storybridge.
Yep. So when Twyla first read this passage to me, in my mind, aside from the Illustrated London News picture that I showed pretty early on in this presentation, this was the next image, and obviously the Frank Short association that immediately came to mind. And this is only one of very few images that Frank Short did of sort of his hometown and the surrounding area. Frank Short, once he leaves the Midlands, he really rarely, seldom, if ever, turns his eye back to it as an artistic source. But here we have literally a wintry blast on the Storybridge Canal. He went home around Christmas time one year and produced this image. But Storybridge was a town of machinery and tall chimneys. You see the chimneys that are almost as tall as the trees. And if it wasn't for literally the strong gust of wind that's sweeping across the plate, alluded to by these diagonal hatch strokes, the smoke that's coming out of it, would rise straight up, but it's being blown sideways. And when Twyla read, it had a black canal in it. Obviously, this, because it's frozen over, it's reflecting the light. But imagine this is summertime. Literally, this canal is going to give you that sort of feeling there. So, and then.
And a river that ran purple with ill-smelling dye, and vast piles of building full of windows where there was a rattling and a trembling all day long, and where the piston of the steam engine worked monotonously up and down, like the head of an elephant in a state of melancholy madness.
That poor elephant. But with this same passage, as Twyla continued to read, it's like, this is the next image by Frank Short that leapt to my brain. And this is not in the exhibition downstairs. We didn't have enough wall space to put all of the really tremendously beautiful and thought-provoking prints that Frank Short produced in the gallery. So this is a print, which is also in Frank Razor's collection, who donated all the Frank Short prints, promise gifts to VMFA. And here we have a print of the Angler's Bridge on the Wandle. And the Wandle is a river. It's about an 11-mile long river stream that starts in like the town of Croydon, which is south of London, and it empties out into the Thames. And when Twyla, read a river that ran purple with ill-smelling dye, the Wandle, because over that 11 miles, it drops 55 feet. Okay, so that's a lot of water power that this little stream is producing. A lot of mills were built up on its banks. And before you get the massive industrialization that's going on in England, the Wandle was renowned for its trout fishing. It's a chalk stream, so it had crystal clear waters, and people could rent the banks for exorbitant fees to go fishing there during the season. But as the river's power was harnessed for industry, you got people pouring their effluent and all of the chemicals back into it. So it really transformed the river into a very polluted state, and it decimated the wildlife that relied upon it. But in Frank Short's print, in the background, I'm giving you a very large detail on the left. Here you see one of the paddle wheels for the mills here. And then on the right, this is an example of a textile that was designed by William Morris, the seminal arts and craftsman, who really created the arts and crafts movement in England. And the name of this textile is the Wandle, after that helpful stream that helped rinse out this fabric. And this textile, the way it was produced was, first you have the fabric, and then you would dye it deep, deep indigo. And then to create the lighter areas and the colored areas, what you would do is then you would bleach out the indigo to create all the different shades of blue that you desired. And then you would add color back in to create these areas. But every time you add a dye or you add bleach to this, you have to rinse the textile out. And that rinsing is happening in the crystal clear waters of the Wandle. So on the one hand, you're getting a beautiful textile, but on the other hand, you're kind of desecrating Mother Nature in a way. And by the time that Frank Short is producing this image of the Angler's Bridge on the Wandle, it looks very picturesque, but very few people were catching anything at all. And if they were, it was incredibly tiny in the stream. So there was a real public outcry for trying to clean the Wandle up.
So, and I just was struck with the memory of this beautiful passage from the opening of Heart of Darkness. And it just seemed to fit so beautifully with Sir Frank Short that we thought we just had to include it. So the sea reach of the Thames stretched before us like the beginning of an interminable waterway. In the offing, the sea and the sky were welded together without a joint. And in the luminous space, the tan sails of the barges, drifting up with the tide, seemed to stand still in red clusters of canvas sharply peaked, with gleams of vanished spirits. A haze rested on the low shores that ran out to sea in vanishing flatness.
And with this particular image, something that's a cool little Jeopardy fact is the Wandle River actually emptied into the Thames at Wandsworth. So this is the terminus point of the Wandle River. So you go from what used to be that picturesque, very pastoral scene to literally industry. And that's quite a juxtaposition. And once again, the printmaking techniques that Frank Short is using really favors sort of creating that smoggy, hazy industrial feel that he really experienced as a child. And so you've been great sports bearing with us. We have just a couple more slides to show you, and then we'll wrap it up and answer whatever questions you have. But I thought a great way to sort of end today's talk was, Frank Short was inspired by all of these books, but he actually was an author too. And in the exhibition downstairs, Frank Razor, our generous donor, has lent his copy of On the Making of Etchings from 1888. So it's the first edition. At least 4 were produced during Frank Short's lifetime of this book. And this is really a treatise. It's very pithy, as you can imagine, being trained as an engineer. It's very cut and dry, nuts and bolts. It's telling readers how you produce etchings and giving you a crash course into it. But the pages that this book is open to downstairs in the gallery are these. And this precedes the actual text that tells you how to go about producing an etching. And it really represents Frank Short's holistic view of, if you decide to become a printmaker, these are the things that you have to bear in mind. So these beautifully illuminated couplets, the miner delveth into the earth and findeth the ore. The smith hammereth the metal and maketh into polished plates. The etcher worketh cunningly with his point and biteth the plate with strong water. Also the printer, he standeth by his press and considereth the ink. And the desire of all these is in the work of their craft. So literally from mine to finished product, that is the domain of a printmaker. And that is what Frank Short is trying to convey to his readers. And this philosophically is slightly different than other printmakers who are producing similar texts at the time, these how-to books. And I just want to sort of give you a juxtaposition. And this is just one instance, which you really see it clearly. So Herbert von Herkomer also produced a text on how to etch a couple of years after Frank Short's in 1891. And instead of, the couplets that are illuminated that I just showed you, this is the image that precedes the text. So this is the frontispiece. And here you see probably a self-portrait of Herkomer at work on a plate, considering his composition, but etching is made using acid. Etches from like the German to bite, and the acid is what really does the work on the plate. And so you have to be careful with the chemicals and the fumes. You don't want to make yourself dizzy. You don't want to hurt yourself with all of this stuff in the studio. And so here the fumes, I'm not sure how well you can see it on your screens, but it's an upside down woman. Her hair is like the tendrils of the fumes, and here's her face upside down, her shoulders, her arms, and she sort of is wrapped, in this whirl of drapery. So she's like an etching muse, and the fumes are like kind of intoxicating and inspiring, creating this hallucinogenic sort of trip that this artist is on. And nothing could be further from how Frank Short thought a printmaker should be working on a print, on a plate. And we can confirm this from an interview that Frank Short gave that was published a couple decades later, after he had taken over the etching school at the Royal College of Art in London. And here is a quote from Frank Short, where he says, "My aim with pupils," Mr. Short will tell you with his characteristically quiet emphasis, "is to make them craftsmen first and foremost, complete masters of their material, so that they shall be able to do what they intend, and there shall be no room for accidents. The artist in them may develop as God pleaseth, and if it be there at all, it will develop. But my chief business is to equip them with the means to express the artist articulately. And Frank Short actually encouraged his students to make their own plates, make their own tools. Frank Short did this when he was starting out and set upon the quest to become a printmaker himself. And so there wasn't a thing such as happy accidents in his classroom. You really wanted to get what was in your brain on the plate so that it translated to the final print. So in terms of our short stories, I guess we could say, Twyla, this is the end. So thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you both. That was wonderful and so full of things for people to look into on their own. So right now we don't have any questions in the chat or the Q&A. I did want to just drop into the chat if anyone has any questions about printmaking methods or techniques. Twyla shared that Colleen made a wonderful resource that's available on our website. So I went ahead and linked that for anyone who would like to learn more about all these different styles or methods of printmaking. And of course, if anyone has any questions, please send them in now. We would be happy to hang on to take any of those.
Well, I might ask a question of Colleen. Colleen, how many prints by Sir Frank Short have been promised to the museum?
Okay, so the VMFA currently has in our collection, like when I do a search in our database, I think we have 411. And 6 or 7 of those were donated by John Barton Payne, who was one of the original donors, founders of the museum. And then another 9 came a few years ago as gifts from Derek and Jane Allenson, who run a gallery in Connecticut. And Derek is actually working on the Frank Short new catalog raisonné, which is due out in a few years. I can't wait to read it. I'm super excited for that. But then the rest are promised gifts from Frank Razor. So about 395 are in Frank Razor's collection. And you know, he is still in the process of collecting. You know, there is no, you know, set in stone, this is it. As things become available and he feels can complement the collection, you know, he's still acquiring. But the 395 prints that are in Frank Razor's collection make his collection the 5th largest in the world of Frank Short prints. So if you think a couple years ago, there was the Wenceslas Holler exhibit in the Evans Court Gallery where Virginia Arcadia just closed. Frank Razor, over the course of decades, amassed a collection for Holler prints that's also the 5th largest in the world. So we're lucky to be in the top 5 with a lot of the artists that Frank Razor collects, and gives us these opportunities to really study broadly the entire careers of these works on paper artists.
Yeah, that's a great question, Twyla. And thank you, Colleen, for linking back to that Holler exhibition. The fact that it's not just Sir Frank Short that Frank Razor is interested in collecting. There's quite a few in his interest area.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and it's like, if you think about, there was a show a few years ago that was co-curated by Christy Cruiser and Chris Oliver, who's the assistant curator for European, or for not for European art, for American art. I'm the assistant curator for European art, so he's American. So Chris and Christy did Remnants and Revivals, which was also in the Works on Paper Gallery, which was John Taylor Arms on one side and Charles Marion on the other. So those works also came from Frank Razor's collection. And for Marion, Frank has probably the most enviable collection of Marion prints. A lot of his prints are as the illustration in the catalog Raisonné for Marion. So we're very, very fortunate for that.
We did have a question come in. I'm wondering if either of you can confirm or muse on the fact if any of the writers crossed paths with Short, or were they aware of his prints and work, or vice versa?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Let's say for different illustrations, it's like, well, let's do this for the Liber. Okay, when Frank Short started tackling printmaking like Turner did and produced the Procris and Cephalus, after he got that print to a certain point, what Frank Short did, because obviously Turner wasn't alive, Turner died, decades prior. But what Frank Short did was he sent that to John Ruskin, who had been the champion of Turner during Turner's life. And essentially Frank Short was just like, can I get your feedback? Which is very bold, very brave, kudos, for that. And so what Ruskin did was say to Frank Short, this is being done just as good as any of the artists alive during Turner's time. And you could really help students across England if you make a set of 12, like essentially the highlight reel of the Liber Studiorum. So pick the top 12 compositions of the 70 that Turner created, publish them, and disseminate them across England to schools. And that's something that Frank Short did. So that was really his first altruistic, short story, if you will, because he didn't do the whole Liber, he just did a portion of it. So that, obviously we didn't have Turner, but we had Ruskin, who was incredibly helpful there. But for other, writers, I know Frank Short did a lot of portraits of writers, and he also did a lot of reproductive engravings after other artists' work. And there we actually have the back and forth between the artist who produced the painting and Frank Short who produced the print. And Frank Short always said, that's an invaluable experience whenever you have the artist literally standing there next to you and explaining, what it is going on in their mind on that. So yes, he probably crossed paths with a lot of them, but I don't have any letters or diary entries to share with you. Not that they don't exist.
Right. Yeah, that would be, well, Colleen and I actually want to go on a fact finding tour of Whitby. Yeah, we have it planned. Yeah.
And that can be something that can be looked into for sure. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. I just want to thank you both so much, and to our audience for joining us today. This was a wonderful, wonderful talk, and I hope it brings some people into the museum to see these works in person. Colleen pointed out that this exhibition is on view until January 9th, so you have plenty of time to do your research and come on in to see it. And with that, I think I will take us out. So thank you so much, Twyla and Colleen. And we hope to see everyone at the museum very soon.
Thank you, Izzy.
Bye.
Bye.